Good evening, everyone. Hope you are doing well and off to a good start for your new year. 2026 is definitely going to be an interesting year. I'm so excited about what is coming, what is going to take place this year. I've heard a lot of responses from our church people already about how excited they are for what is to come, and so I look forward to sharing more about that specifically this coming Sunday morning. But nevertheless, at least for 2026 and thinking about our Wednesday night study, of course, being able to find a book to go through and kind of having that deeper side of study. And so, of course, as you can kind of tell from how the video has started, we're going to start into the book of Daniel. I know that I had several people that made comments this last Sunday about how much they enjoyed the book of Daniel and different things. And so, in essence, kind of kickstarting our year, I wanted to begin just kind of thinking, or at least for tonight, thinking about the background of the book of Daniel. And so there's a few things that we have to understand. Of course, the deportations, the very first item that you see on the screen there, the 605, 598, and 586 BC, those dates are extremely important for you to remember, okay? And the reason why they are is because of the fact that they relate to just where you're at in the overall just timeline of history, especially as it comes into the book of Daniel. You start to think through the last few kings of Israel, or that is more specifically, you can call them Israel, but they're known as the southern kingdom of Judah. So if you see different things, that I think that's why sometimes it's hard for people to understand the books of like 1 Kings and 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, on even to, the book of like Isaiah and Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, different ones like that, is because you're seeing different references, but they're, so to speak, the same people, but they have different names. And so if you see Israel and Judah, just know that they can be used kind of interchangeably as it relates to this. But specifically to the deportations, Babylonians begin to exert their dominance over the southern kingdom of Judah, and their goal is to come through the first time in 605 BC. Of course, they're going to take, kind of as I alluded to even on Sunday, they're taking the top tier people, your government officials, your, young kids that are going to eventually step into those roles, that kind of thing. And so their goal is to get kind of the head of Judah removed and out of the equation before they continue on. And so, and even as you can see, 605 to 586, you're talking 29 years before anything really actually, 19 years of where it's kind of a slow and steady process of how the Babylonians officially kind of take over the southern kingdom of Judah. And so as you go into that next part, you can see the last kings of Judah. You have Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and then Zedekiah, as it relates to those last three kings of the southern kingdom of Judah. What I would just real briefly touch on for this is, if you don't have an understanding or a working knowledge of the kingdom of Judah right now, I would simply say this. In essence, what you're going to find is there's a lot of turnover and there's a lot of pride. There's a lot of murder and death and killing. That is, one king was on the throne, and then, like even for these three that you see on the screen right here, somebody didn't like them, and so somebody went up and killed them, and then the next one just assumed the throne. And so there's a high rate of turnover within the southern kingdom of Judah. Is even worse, I would say, in the northern kingdom, because at least the southern kingdom had a few good kings. The northern kingdom, you don't find any good kings. So at least the southern kingdom, that's why they in essence lasted a little longer. The northern kingdom ended up falling in 722 BC to the Assyrians. And here, of course, we're seeing the last three kings specifically as it relates to the southern kingdom of Judah, but as well, a little over 200 years longer did they last. And so that's just a little bit of kind of a construct of where the timeline is at in terms of the book of Daniel. One of the big things that I would suggest or say is that, and of course we'll break a lot of this down, so don't I wouldn't say, especially at the outset, be overwhelmed or do I have to have a lot of understanding and knowledge. We'll dive off into all that as we begin to work our way through the book of Daniel. But overall, the reason why it's considered apocalyptic literature is because of the fact that it deals in prophecies, not all of it, but there are several things prophetically that begin to be discussed by Daniel, portrayed about what is coming into the future, that some of which we still haven't seen, and some of the things to which we have seen. So there's kind of a, I don't want to say an imbalance, but there's a understanding that we have to have moving forward about how it is constructed in order to gain a bigger picture. And so the book of Daniel would say, or scholars tend to believe, that it was completed in about 530 BC. In essence, if you go back to the book of Jeremiah, that's where you'll actually read about the kingdom would be in captivity for about 70 years. And so this is kind of where we see Daniel's perspective, or the book itself, kind of carrying out from the beginning to the end of that captivity, okay? And so just a little bit of background to kind of keep you in mind. In terms of a theme, thinking about what does Daniel's book represent, what does it stand for? A lot of people would say it's about God's sovereignty, that we're not able to thwart the plans of God. We are under His jurisdiction one way or another. And God's sovereignty, that is God's will, God's plans, that is God's overall movement and what He is doing, that He has the final say. And I don't think that there's any misunderstanding about that through the book of Daniel. Even what I kind of alluded to on Sunday, whether it was them, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being taken captive officially into that first chapter, but yet those boys find favor with God. In chapter 2, in the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, you once again find a point of where God, displays sovereign control over Daniel and the friends there in the region of Babylon. Chapter 3 in the fiery furnace, what we looked at on Sunday. Going over into Belshazzar in chapter 5, you see the writing on the wall, different things. You think of Daniel in the lion's den, in chapter 6. All of those things kind of begin to correlate together as to this overall understanding of God is in control. But even from chapter 7 on into chapter 12, you find a shift of which we'll talk about in a second, but you see that portion of it to where you start to see prophetically what is coming on into the later days. And so in terms of God's sovereignty, I would definitely agree that it is extremely dominant within the book of Daniel. The first chapter, to which as we dive off into next week, and there again, the first few weeks of us doing this is going to have a lot of information. It's going to be a lot of background knowledge into understanding what is happening and going on. But there again, the first chapter of the book of Daniel gives that precedent of saying this is what's happening, this is what's going on. It gives us, kind of that timeline. One of the things that I would just kind of readily say whenever it comes to studying the book of Daniel is you'll have mixed, I don't want to say as well as interpretations, but thoughts and views as to how to perceive the book of Daniel. There again, we're talking about apocalyptic literature. What is happening in future things? That is, there are still things in the book of Daniel that we have not seen even at this moment that have been prophesied about. And so kind of drawing that all together, that's where some people, everybody's got an opinion. At that point, like in Daniel chapter, I think it's chapter 9, is whenever you start to read about the 70 weeks of Daniel, there's a whole bag of understanding and comments and commentaries, opinions, you name it, as to what exactly that means. But there again, when we get to that a few months from now, we'll dive off into all of that. But at least for the understanding at this current juncture, I would just simply say that there are people that want to discredit the book of Daniel just simply because there are things that Daniel represents and stands for, and there are things that are within the book that just, it challenges the minds of people, and whenever they're found to be challenged by something, the easiest thing to do is discredit the book or the author, credibility, rather than trying to figure out, or even if we can, what is happening and going on. And so just something to kind of keep you keep readily available in the back of your mind. Another point that I would just simply kind of throw out there as just a, point of understanding, I would encourage you, begin reading the book of Daniel as a whole, but recognize or realize, in essence, it's not in chronological order. It is, but it restarts, okay? So chapters 1 through 6, you find a chronological order, and then starting in chapter 7, you actually jump back and you begin to rebuild another chronological order based on different prophecies. And so kind of think, if you're reading through the book of Daniel or you're thinking about it, consider the lens to which you're walking through in terms of the division of chapter 1 through 6 verses 7 through 12. And so, and then as well, there again, just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Of course, we're going to build all these things, but like for instance, in chapter 3, as we were talking about Sunday, here it is, Nebuchadnezzar has this, golden image that is erected there in Babylon that is 90 feet tall. It's made of gold and then silver and clay and all these different things. Eventually, as we dive off into the book of Daniel, into which there again, I would just say, keep this in mind, okay? You're going to begin to find a lot of prophecies that relate to I would say, our four kingdoms of the world, okay? And so that is understanding the Babylonians first, of which, of course, take into captivity here. By the end of Daniel's life, as you get into the, like the end of the book in 530 BC, you start to see a transition to where the Babylonians are removed and the Medes and the Persians become the next ruling power of the day. And then once that falls through, you have the Greek Empire that becomes, the predominant or the world power at the time. So you're talking like Alexander the Great and everybody like that, to which I would say we're eventually going to get into it. But I would say one of the most disgusting, hard-fought times of what I would say the Hebrew people, apart from the Holocaust, of which you think about for the Jewish nation in World War II. I mean, I would say whenever you think of, or if you've heard of the term like the Maccabean Revolt, and you'll learn about this guy by the name of Antiochus IV, there's a lot of information that is packed into it. And so just know or be prepared whenever you're thinking about what these four kingdoms represent. A lot of these things are things that we're going to have to be aware of because they're going to be tied together and interwoven and linked together as we're reading and studying the book of Daniel. But nevertheless, the Babylonians, the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, and then lastly, you see kind of this final conclusion of partially the Roman Empire, potentially linked on into the actual apocalypse, or what we would say is the book of Revelation that the Revelator John wrote about, that we know as the end or the last book of what we would say is our Bible. And so there again, I would just encourage you. Maybe you're not a pen and paper kind of guy or girl of taking notes, different things. I'm going to do my best to break those things down for us and to try to help, I don't want to say decipher, but to gain the information as we walk through this. But there again, it's just, there's going to be days or times where it's going to be like drinking from a fire hydrant. It's just going to be, a lot of information to produce, and to which ultimately kind of comes back to an understanding is that the reason why Daniel, or the book of Ezekiel, we think of like the book of Revelation. It's very symbolic. There's a lot of prophecy. There's a lot of things to think through. And so in terms of just our understanding of the book of Daniel as we work through it, just know that there is going to be a lot of pulling and, bringing together, not just out of the book of Daniel, but from other books as well, even Ezekiel and Revelation. So there again, just kind of a heads up. This is going to be a lot to think through. It's going to be potentially a lot to process. There's going to be a lot of information that is given, but ultimately what I'm hoping for by the end of the study is that you'll not only have a potential deeper understanding of what prophecy looks like, and there again, even thinking through the book of Revelation, how those things are tied together. Hopefully it's going to give us a deeper understanding of not only who God is, the purpose of why Christ had to come and die on a cross, but as well, ultimately, how things are going to play out and why it is so significant for us to, be integrated with and into the Word of God. It's going to hopefully just challenge us and deepen our Bible study as a whole, and maybe even connect some dots for us along the way. But I'm looking forward to this study. Like anything else, as you're watching this, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, I'll do my best to relay that, back into the videos themselves. So that way, if people have potentially the same question or they have other questions, we can kind of keep as much as possible kind of a dialogue flowing. And so, and of course, I'll do my best to answer those questions, to give different views, understandings of why I carry even the positions that I do as a Christian. And so hopefully this will be able to be just an overall wonderful study for us to go through and deepen there again our relationship with God and understanding of what's happening and going on even within our world today, and then hopefully connect some dots along the way. But nevertheless, I'll go ahead and wrap up the background portion of it. I hope you all have a great and wonderful week, or rest of your week, and from there, I guess I'll see you next Wednesday as we dive off into chapter 1 and dig a little deeper into the background of what is taking place. But see you guys. Love y'all. Appreciate y'all. And if you need anything, just holler.